In a glass-walled Manhattan conference room, Leo Carter slid the prenup across the table and said it plainly, as if it were a favor. $2 million, he explained, needed protection from uncertainty, from risk, from her. Margaret Carter watched with quiet approval. No one interrupted. Deanna Kelly didn't argue. She didn't ask questions. She signed, clean, immediate, final. The attorney hesitated just for a second, because what Leo believed he had secured was already the document that would undo him. If you believe respect should never come with conditions, stay with this story until the end. Before we go further, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories like this matter to you, quiet truth, real consequences, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. New York did not reveal its power easily. It disguised it behind modest office doors, neutral tones, and people who never raised their voices. Deanna Kelly understood that language better than most. She moved through it quietly, deliberately, as if she had learned long ago that visibility was not the same as influence. Her office sat on the 12th floor of a building that no one outside finance ever noticed. The firm's name, Halstead Advisory Group, was printed in understated lettering near the entrance, the kind that suggested stability rather than ambition. Inside, the work was precise, analytical, and deliberately unremarkable. Deanna held the title of senior analyst. Her desk was clean, her screens were organized. Her presence rarely disrupted anything, but she noticed everything. That morning, she arrived before most of her colleagues, placing her bag beneath the desk and powering on her laptop with a steady, practiced motion. The inbox filled instantly. Market summaries, client reports, internal notes. She scanned them quickly, absorbing patterns rather than details. Trends mattered more than noise. At 8:17 a.m., a new email appeared. No subject line, no signature. Just a short line of text: review completed, awaiting your confirmation. She read it once. Then again. There was no visible sender, only an encrypted address she recognized without needing to trace it. Her expression did not change. She closed the message, archived it, and continued working as if nothing had arrived at all. Across the room, a junior associate laughed too loudly at something trivial. A manager corrected a spreadsheet with visible irritation. The rhythms of the office remained predictable, controlled, safe. Deanna preferred it that way. By noon, she had already completed her assigned reports. Her supervisor, Michael Reeves, stopped by her desk with a brief nod of approval. "You're ahead again," he said, flipping through the printed pages. "You always are." She gave a small, polite smile. "Just keeping things organized." Michael lingered for a moment, as if expecting more. When none came, he nodded again and walked away. Deanna returned to her screen, her attention shifting not to new tasks, but to the spaces between them, the gaps where information tended to reveal itself. At 12:43 p.m., her phone vibrated. A name appeared briefly before the screen dimmed. Charles Whitmore. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let it ring once more, before stepping away from her desk, moving toward the quiet corridor near the emergency stairwell. Only then did she accept the call. "Yes," she said. The voice on the other end was calm, measured older. "Everything is in place," Charles said. "No changes unless you request them." "I won't," Deanna replied. "Not yet." A pause, not hesitation, just acknowledgement. "He's proceeding?" Charles asked. "Yes." "And you're certain?" Deanna looked through the narrow window in the stairwell door, watching the city below without really seeing it. "I've been certain for a while," she said. There were no further questions. The call ended as quietly as it had begun. She returned to her desk without drawing attention, her posture unchanged, her expression neutral. No one asked where she had gone. Leo Carter preferred places where people noticed him. His office sat in a newly renovated co-working space in Soho, where glass partitions and exposed brick signaled growth ambition and a kind of curated success. His startup, Transit Axis, had been operating for just under 2 years. It specialized in logistics optimization software, a niche that sounded more impressive the longer he explained it. The company's valuation hovered around $2 million. Not insignificant, not extraordinary, but enough to justify confidence. Leo leaned back in his chair, scrolling through projected revenue charts with a satisfied expression. Numbers could be arranged to suggest momentum, and he had become skilled at arranging them that way. "Claire's coming in at 2, his assistant called from the doorway. He didn't look up. "I know. Claire Donovan didn't work for him. Not officially. She was a consultant brought in to advise on scaling operations and investor strategy. She was also increasingly someone Leo listened to more than anyone else. At precisely 2 o'clock, she walked in without knocking. "Still working on projections?" she asked, glancing at the screen. "Refining them," Leo said. "Investors want confidence." Claire stepped closer, leaning slightly over the desk. "Investors want clarity," she corrected. "Confidence comes after." Her tone was smooth-assured. She spoke as if she had already seen outcomes that Leo was still trying to imagine. He smiled. "That's why you're here." Claire didn't return the smile fully. Instead, her gaze shifted briefly to the framed photo on the corner of his desk, Leo and Deanna, standing side by side, both dressed formally, both composed. "She's still at that firm?" Claire asked. Leo followed her glance, then shrugged. "Yeah, Halstead. Nothing major. Does she understand what you're building?" He hesitated, not long, but enough. "She doesn't need to," he said. Claire nodded as if that answer confirmed something she had already suspected. That evening, Deanna returned to the apartment she shared with Leo. It was modern, carefully decorated, and filled with objects that suggested intention rather than history. The lights were on when she entered, though Leo wasn't immediately visible. She placed her keys in the tray by the door, her movements quiet, almost deliberate in their restraint. From the living room, Leo's voice carried, "It's just a formality," he was saying. "Standard practice." He was on the phone. Deanna didn't interrupt. She moved into the kitchen, setting down her bag, pouring a glass of water. The conversation continued in the background, fragmented but clear enough. No, she won't have an issue with it. A pause. She's reasonable. Deanna took a sip of water, her gaze resting briefly on the reflection in the window. The city lights behind her blurred into something abstract, distant. When Leo ended the call, he stepped into the kitchen, his expression relaxed. "You're back," he said. "I am." He opened the fridge, scanning its contents without urgency. "I spoke to my lawyer today." Deanna waited. "We're going to move forward with the prenup," he continued. "It's just to protect the business, you understand?" She set the glass down carefully. "Yes," she said. Leo glanced at her, perhaps expecting a question, a hesitation, something more than agreement. When none came, he nodded as if confirming his own expectations. "It's standard," he added. "Nothing personal." "Of course," Deanna replied. The conversation ended there. Not because it was resolved, but because Leo believed it was. Later that night, after Leo had gone to sleep, Deanna sat alone at the small desk near the window. Her laptop was open, the screen dimmed to its lowest brightness. She navigated through a series of secured folders, each labeled in a way that revealed nothing to anyone. Without context, financial statements, legal frameworks, ownership structures layered across jurisdictions. At the center of it all was a network of entities that did not bear her name. But they belonged to her. A notification appeared in the corner of the screen. Whitmore Capital Quarterly Review, ready. She opened it briefly, scanned, closed it again. No reaction, no visible shift. Only a quiet certainty that had been building long before Leo ever mentioned the word prenup. She shut the laptop, leaving the room in near darkness. Outside, the city continued its endless movement, unaware of the decisions already set in motion within a single apartment window. Deanna stood there for a moment longer, her reflection faint against the glass. She wasn't thinking about the contract, not anymore. She was thinking about what it had already revealed. Leo Carter did not introduce the idea of the prenup as a demand. He introduced it as something reasonable. It happened 3 nights later at a restaurant Margaret Carter had chosen with deliberate care. The kind of place where the lighting softened everything, just enough to make conversations feel controlled, where the tables were spaced wide enough to give privacy, but close enough to remind everyone they were being observed. Deanna arrived on time. She always did. Margaret was already seated, her posture upright, her expression composed in a way that suggested she had rehearsed this evening in her mind. Beside her sat Sophie Carter, scrolling through her phone until she noticed Deanna approaching. Leo stood as Deanna reached the table, leaning in for a brief, polite kiss on the cheek. "You look nice," he said. "Thank you," Deanna replied. It was a simple exchange, clean, without weight. They sat. Menus were opened, drinks were ordered. Conversation began with neutral topics: traffic work, a recent news story that no one seemed particularly invested in. The rhythm was familiar, predictable. Margaret allowed it to continue for exactly 11 minutes. Then she set her glass down. "Leo mentioned you've both been discussing the future," she said, her voice calm, measured, directed at Deanna, without appearing confrontational. Deanna met her gaze. "We have." Margaret nodded slightly. "That's good. Clarity is important." Sophie glanced up from her phone, interest sharpening just enough to signal she had been waiting for this moment. Leo shifted in his seat, not uncomfortable, but aware. "It's just about making sure everything is structured properly," he said. "For the business." Deanna didn't respond immediately. She let the silence sit just long enough for the words to settle. "Structured," she repeated. "Yes," Leo said. "Protected." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "You have to understand, Deanna, Leo has worked very hard for what he's built. These things aren't about distrust. They're about responsibility." Sophie let out a small, quiet laugh, not loud enough to interrupt, but clear enough to be heard. "It's pretty standard," she added, "especially when one person has more to protect." The sentence lingered, not because of what was said, but because of what was implied. Deanna picked up her glass of water, taking a small sip before setting it down again. Her movements were unhurried, precise. "I understand," she said. Margaret studied her for a moment, as if trying to detect resistance where there was none. "You don't seem surprised," she noted. "I'm not," Deanna replied. Leo exhaled quietly, a tension he hadn't acknowledged releasing just slightly. "It's really nothing complicated," he said. "Just a precaution." Sophie tilted her head, her expression sharpening with curiosity. "You've never dealt with anything like this before, have you?" she asked Deanna. "Financial agreements, legal structures?" The question was framed as casual. It wasn't. Deanna turned her gaze towards Sophie, her expression unchanged. "I've seen them," she said. Sophie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Seen them isn't the same as understanding them." Leo didn't interrupt. That more than anything settled the tone of the evening. The waiter arrived with their food, placing each dish carefully on the table. For a few minutes, the conversation shifted again, light-controlled, almost normal. But the shift didn't last. Margaret returned to the subject without hesitation. "Have you thought about what you would want included?" she asked Deanna. Leo glanced at her, slightly surprised by the directness. "Mom, we don't need to." We don't need." "It's a fair question," Margaret said, not looking at him. Deanna considered the question not for its content, but for its intention. "What would you suggest?" she asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. Clarity on asset division, protection of Leo's company, limitations on financial claims in the event of separation. Each point was delivered with the calm certainty of someone who had already decided the outcome. Sophie nodded along, adding, "And probably something about intellectual property. You know, just in case." Leo gave a small, approving nod. "Exactly." Deanna listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't correct. She simply observed. The way Margaret's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table, steady, controlled. The way Sophie leaned back slightly after speaking, satisfied with her contribution. The way Leo avoided looking directly at her for more than a few seconds at a time. It wasn't the words that mattered. It was the pattern. "You've thought about this carefully," Deanna said. Margaret allowed herself a small smile. "I always do." "And you agree with all of it?" Deanna asked, turning her attention to Leo. Leo hesitated just briefly. "It makes sense," he said. "It's just about being practical. Practical." The word settled into the space between them. Deanna nodded once. "Then I don't see an issue," she said. Sophie's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's it." Deanna met her gaze again. "That's it." Margaret watched her closely, searching for something beneath the surface. Doubt, discomfort, resistance. There was none, only stillness. The rest of the dinner passed without incident. Conversation returned to safer topics. Dessert was ordered. The check was paid. But something had shifted. Not visibly, not in a way anyone at the table could name. But it had. Later that night, as they walked back to the car, Leo glanced at Deanna, his expression thoughtful. "You handled that well," he said. Deanna adjusted the sleeve of her coat, her movements calm. "It wasn't difficult," she replied. Leo nodded, as if confirming something he had already believed. "I just didn't want it to feel uncomfortable." "It didn't," she said. They reached the car. Leo unlocked it, holding the door open for her. She stepped inside without hesitation. As he walked around to the driver's side, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen briefly before slipping it back into his pocket. Deanna noticed. She always did. Back at the apartment, Leo headed straight for the shower, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up once, then again. A name appeared. Claire Donovan. A message preview followed. "You handled tonight exactly the way we talked about." The screen dimmed before the rest of the message could be read. Deanna stood a few feet away, her gaze steady. She didn't touch the phone. She didn't need to. Instead, she turned and walked into the living room, sitting down on the edge of the sofa. The apartment was quiet, except for the distant sound of running water. She let the silence stretch. Not empty, just revealing. A few minutes later, Leo returned, drying his hair with a towel. He moved through the space casually, as if nothing had shifted. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," Deanna said. He nodded, satisfied. After he went to bed, Deanna remained in the living room, her laptop open once again. The screen illuminated her face just enough to outline her expression, calm, focused, unchanged. She opened a new document. At the top, she typed a single line, "Timeline, Carter, Leo." Below it, she began listing dates, dinner, conversation, witnesses present. She paused, then added another entry, "Communication. Donovan, Claire." No conclusions, no commentary, just records, just facts. On the right side of the screen, another window remained open. A secure portal requiring multiple layers of authentication. She accessed it without hesitation. Inside were documents far more complex than anything discussed at dinner. Legal structures that extended across states and countries. Ownership records that did not appear in public filings. At the center of it all, a name appeared only once. Whitmore Trust. Deanna didn't open the files. She didn't need to. Instead, she closed the portal, returning to the document she had created. The timeline continued to grow, each entry precise, each detail intentional. When she finished, she saved the file without a title that could be easily recognized. Then she closed the laptop, leaving the room in darkness once more. She stood by the window, looking out at the city. From this height, everything appeared distant, manageable, reduced to patterns of light and motion. Behind her, Leo slept without interruption. He believed the conversation at dinner had resolved something. He believed the prenup was simply a step forward. He believed Deanna had agreed. And she had, just not in the way he understood, because what had begun as a discussion about protection had already become something else entirely, something that would not require raised voices or visible conflict, only time and the quiet accumulation of truth. Daniel Brooks preferred clients who asked questions. They tended to understand consequences. They tended to recognize that legal language was not simply structure. It was intention translated into permanence. Leo Carter did not ask many questions. He arrived at Daniel's office 15 minutes early, confident in a way that suggested he believed the meeting would confirm what he already knew. Deanna arrived exactly on time, stepping into the conference room with the same quiet composure she carried everywhere else. The room itself was minimal. Polished wood table, neutral walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a narrow slice of Midtown. Nothing distracting, nothing excessive. Daniel stood as they entered. "Good afternoon," he said, extending his hand first to Leo, then to Deanna. Leo replied, firm grip, brief smile. "Thanks for putting this together." "Of course," Daniel said. His eyes moved to Deanna just briefly. "Miss Kelly, thank you for meeting with us," she said. Her tone was even, neutral, not deferential, not defensive. Daniel gestured for them to sit. A folder rested in front of each chair, identical in appearance, though only one contained what truly mattered. Leo opened his immediately. "This is straightforward," he said, flipping through the first few pages without reading them closely. "Just standard protection." Daniel didn't respond right away. Instead, he folded his hands lightly on the table. "It's structured to protect premarital assets and future business growth," he said. "But I'd like to walk through the key provisions." Leo nodded. "Sure." Deanna did not open her folder. Daniel noticed. He began anyway. "Section 1 outlines the classification of separate property," he said. "All assets currently held by Mr. Carter remain exclusively his in the event of dissolution of the marriage." Leo leaned back, slightly satisfied. "Right. Section 2 addresses appreciation of those assets." Daniel continued. "Any increase in value, including that of transit access, remains separate and not subject to division." Leo nodded again. Deanna remained still. Daniel's gaze shifted to her briefly, then back to the document. "Section 3 limits claims on future earnings," he said, "including any equity dividends or distributions derived from Mr. Carter's business interests." Leo exhaled softly. "That's important." Daniel paused. "Yes," he said, "it is." He turned a page. "Section 4 restricts spousal support under most circumstances," he added, "unless specific conditions are met, which are outlined here." Leo skimmed the page. "That's fine." Daniel placed the document down. "Miss Kelly," he said, his voice calm, measured, "have you had the opportunity to review these terms with independent counsel?" The question was direct. Necessary. Deanna met his gaze without hesitation. "No," she said. The answer hung in the air. Leo shifted slightly. "It's not that complicated," he said. "We've gone over it." Daniel didn't look at him. "I would strongly recommend that you seek independent legal advice," he said to Deanna. "Prenuptial agreements can have long-term implications, and it's important that both parties fully understand I understand, Deanna said. Daniel paused. There was no defensiveness in her tone, no impatience, just certainty. Understanding the language, he said carefully, and understanding the consequences are not always the same. I'm aware, she replied. Leo leaned forward, his tone tightening just slightly. She's fine with it, Daniel. Daniel finally turned his attention to Leo. My responsibility is to ensure the agreement is entered into fairly, he said. That includes confirming both parties have had the opportunity for independent review. Leo nodded, but there was a hint of irritation now. And she has that opportunity. Daniel looked back at Deanna. Do you wish to exercise it, he asked. A simple question, one that in most cases would delay the process, create space, introduce negotiation. Deanna didn't hesitate. No, she said. Silence followed. Not long, but enough. Daniel studied her for a moment, searching for something uncertainty, perhaps, or pressure, something that would require intervention. He found neither. Very well, he said finally. Leo relaxed the tension leaving his shoulders. See, he said, glancing at Deanna. It's just a formality. Deanna gave a small nod. Daniel closed the folder in front of him, his movements slower now. There is one additional clause, he said, a standard disclosure requirement. Both parties affirm that they have fully disclosed their assets prior to signing. Leo waved a hand dismissively. Of course. Daniel's gaze returned to Deanna. And you are comfortable affirming that, he asked. Yes, she said. The answer came without pause, without qualification. Daniel nodded once. Then we can proceed when you're ready, he said. The meeting ended shortly after. Leo stood extending his hand again. Appreciate it, Daniel. Of course, Daniel replied. Deanna gathered her belongings, leaving the folder untouched on the table. Miss Kelly, Daniel said as she turned to leave. She paused. If you change your mind, he added, my recommendation stands. She held his gaze for a moment. I know, she said. Then she left. Outside, the city moved as it always did, constant, indifferent. Leo walked beside her, his steps slightly faster, energized. That went well, he said. Better than I expected. Deanna adjusted the strap of her bag. Did it? Yeah, he said. No complications, no delays. He glanced at her. I thought you might want to go over things more. I didn't need to, she replied. Leo smiled, satisfied. Exactly. They reached the corner, waiting for the light to change. You trust me, he said, more statement than question. Deanna looked straight ahead. I understand you, she said. Leo didn't notice the difference. Later that afternoon, Deanna returned to her office. The environment felt unchanged, predictable, controlled. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up her inbox. A new message appeared. From Evelyn Grant, subject available when needed. Deanna read it once. Then she replied, not yet, but soon. She closed the email and opened another window. The document she had started the night before. Timeline, Carter Leo. She added a new entry. Meeting, Brooks Daniel. Terms confirmed. Independent counsel declined. Disclosure affirmed. No commentary, just facts. Her phone vibrated. Another call. Charles Whitmore. She let it ring once, twice, then answered. Yes, the agreement, Charles asked. Proceeding, she said, and your position unchanged. It's clear now, she replied. A pause. Clarity has value, Charles said. Yes, Deanna said. It does. The call ended. That evening, Deanna stopped by a small stationery store on her way home. It wasn't a place she visited often, but she moved through it with quiet intention, scanning the shelves until she found what she was looking for. A pen. Simple, elegant, black lacquer, gold trim. She held it for a moment, testing the weight. Then she purchased it without hesitation. Back at the apartment, Leo was on the phone again, pacing near the window. "No, it's locked in," he was saying. "No surprises." Deanna set her bag down, placing the small box containing the pen on the table. Leo ended the call, turning toward her. "Everything's moving," he said. "This is good." She nodded. "It is." He stepped closer, glancing at the box. "What's that?" "Just something I needed," she said. He didn't ask further. Later, after Leo had gone to bed, Deanna opened the box. She removed the pen, turning it slowly between her fingers. It was balanced, precise, reliable. She placed it beside her laptop, then opened a new document. At the top, she typed, "Agreement Execution." Below it, a single line. Signed without contest. She saved the file, closed the laptop, and turned off the light. In another part of the city, Daniel Brooks sat alone in his office, the folder still open in front of him. He had seen agreements like this before. He had drafted them, reviewed them, watched them unravel in courtrooms years later. But something about this one lingered. Not in the language, not in the structure, in the silence, in the absence of resistance where resistance should have been. He closed the folder slowly, because experience had taught him something simple. When a person declined protection without hesitation, it was rarely because they had nothing to protect. There were things Deanna Kelly never explained. Not because she was hiding them, but because explanation would have reduced them. Power, when spoken aloud, often became something smaller than it truly was. It invited questions. It invited doubt. It invited people to measure it against their own understanding, and most people did not understand much beyond what they could see. So Deanna chose not to explain. She chose to observe. The Whitmore name did not appear often in public records. That had been intentional. Charles Whitmore had spent decades building a structure that existed just outside visibility, never invisible, but never obvious. Investments layered through holding companies. Assets distributed across jurisdictions that rarely intersected. Partnerships that looked independent but moved with quiet alignment. It wasn't secrecy. It was design. And at the center of that design, there was a single point of continuity. Deanna. She had not always understood the scale of it. As a child, she had only noticed the patterns. The way her father spoke less than others. The way decisions were made without urgency. The way people listened when he did speak, even when his voice was calm. Never move first when you don't have to. Charles had told her once years ago while reviewing a set of documents she was too young to fully interpret. Let people show you who they are, when they think nothing is at stake. At the time, she had nodded without fully understanding. Now she understood completely. The apartment she shared with Leo reflected none of that history. It was modern, clean, carefully curated to suggest progress rather than foundation. The furniture had been selected together, though the choices had leaned toward Leo's preferences. Bold lines, visible statements, pieces that drew attention. Deanna had agreed to all of it. Agreement, she had learned, often revealed more than resistance. That morning, she woke before Leo moving quietly through the apartment. The city outside was still in that brief moment between darkness and light when everything felt suspended. She made coffee without sound, her movements practiced. On the kitchen counter, Leo's laptop remained open from the night before. A presentation deck filled the screen: projections, growth curves, market expansion strategies. Transit axis. She stepped closer, not touching the keyboard, just observing. The numbers were optimistic, not unrealistic, but arranged in a way that assumed control over variables that were rarely controllable. Investor behavior, market shifts, timing. Things Leo believed he could manage. Things Deanna knew could not be managed, only anticipated. She turned away before the screen dimmed. At Halstead Advisory Group, the day unfolded as expected. Meetings, reports, quiet conversations that carried more meaning than their words suggested. Michael Reeves approached her desk just before noon. "We're reviewing a potential logistics portfolio this afternoon," he said. "Might align with your experience." Deanna looked up briefly. "Which firm, Transit Axis, is in the mix?" he replied. "Early stage, but there's interest." A pause, not visible, but present. "I can prepare a preliminary analysis," she said. Michael nodded. That would be helpful. He walked away unaware of the layers beneath the simple exchange. Deanna opened a new file. Not the standard template. Something more precise. Across the city, Leo sat in a conference room that felt larger than it needed to be. Claire Donovan stood at the far end. Her posture relaxed her presence, filling the space without effort. "You're thinking too small," she said, gesturing toward the screen. $2 million is a starting point, not a ceiling. Leo leaned forward, elbows on the table. "It's realistic." Claire shook her head slightly. "Investors don't fund realism. They fund trajectory." She stepped closer, her tone lowering just enough to shift the dynamic. "You need to position this as inevitable," she continued. "Growth that's already in motion, not something you're hoping to achieve." Leo watched her, absorbing each word. "And the prenup?" she asked casually, as if it were a minor detail. "It's done," he said. "No complications." Claire's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good," she said. "Clarity matters." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. That evening, Deanna returned to the apartment to find Leo already home. He was on the phone again, his tone energized. "We're looking at multiple interested parties," he was saying. "This isn't just speculation anymore." He ended the call as she entered. "You're early," he said. "So are you," she replied. He smiled, moving toward the kitchen. "Things are moving fast." Deanna set her bag down. "They are." He poured himself a drink, the motion casual, confident. "I met with Claire today," he said. "She's pushing for a higher valuation. Says we should aim bigger." Deanna watched him, her expression neutral. "And you agree?" she asked. "Of course," he said. "There's no reason not to." A brief silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just revealing. Later, as Leo stepped out to take another call, his phone remained on the counter. The screen lit up. A message. "Claire Donovan. You're exactly where you need to be. Don't second guess it." The message remained visible for a few seconds before the screen dimmed. Deanna didn't move toward it. She didn't need confirmation. Patterns confirmed themselves. That night, after Leo had fallen asleep, Deanna returned to the desk near the window. Her laptop opened to a secure network that required more than a password. Verification codes, encrypted access points, layers that existed to ensure only one person could reach what lay beneath. She navigated through them without hesitation. The interface that appeared was different from anything at Halstead. Clean, minimal, but vast. A series of entities connected through lines that only made sense when viewed as a whole. At the center, a single designation, Whitmore Capital. She selected a folder, Transit Axis Preliminary Review. Inside were documents she had not created. Analyses, risk assessments, market projections that extended beyond Leo's presentation. More precise, less optimistic, more real. She read them without reaction, absorbing the information quickly. Then she opened a new document, Observation Carter Leo. She added a line, valuation influenced by external advisory Donovan Claire. Overconfidence increasing, risk awareness decreasing. Another line followed, prenup executed without negotiation. Indicator perception of control. She paused. then added one more conclusion pending. Across the room, Leo shifted in his sleep, unaware of the quiet accumulation of detail happening just a few feet away. He believed the prenup had secured something. He believed it had defined boundaries. He believed it had clarified ownership. And in a way it had, just not in the direction he expected. Deanna closed the document and leaned back slightly, her gaze moving toward the window. The city stretched out before her, endless layered, filled with movement that never truly stopped. Somewhere within it, decisions were being made. Deals negotiated, positions taken. Most of them visible. Some of them not. She had spent years learning the difference, learning where real control resided. Not in statements, not in declarations, but in structure, in timing, in silence. Her phone vibrated once. A message. Evelyn Grant. Preliminary filings prepared. Awaiting instruction. Deanna read it, then locked the screen without replying. Not yet. There was still something she needed. Not information, not confirmation, something else. Something that could not be written into a document or summarized in a report. Something that had to be shown. By Leo. Without him realizing it. She turned off the laptop, the room falling into near darkness once again. Only the faint glow of the city remained. Deanna stood there for a moment, her reflection barely visible against the glass. She wasn't thinking about the prenup anymore. That part was already complete. What mattered now was what came after. Because contracts did not define people, they revealed them. And Leo had only just begun to reveal himself. Control did not arrive all at once. It appeared gradually in ways that could be explained, justified, even dismissed, until the pattern became too consistent to ignore. Leo Carter did not wake up one morning and decide to change. He adjusted, one small decision at a time. It started with something ordinary, a credit card. "Hey," Leo said one evening, standing near the kitchen counter, his tone casual. "We should probably streamline expenses." Deanna looked up from her laptop. "Streamline?" "Yeah," he said, opening a banking app on his phone. "Now that things are getting more serious with the company, I want to keep everything tighter, cleaner." He turned the screen toward her briefly, though not long enough for her to read anything specific. "I'll just handle most of the shared expenses moving forward," he added. "It's easier that way." Deanna considered the statement not for its practicality, but for its implication. "And mine?" she asked. Leo shrugged lightly. "You can still use your account, obviously. Just keep it simple. Simple." The words settled into the space between them. Deanna nodded once. "Of course." Leo smiled, relieved by the absence of resistance. The next adjustment came 2 days later. A dinner reservation. "We don't need to go somewhere that expensive," Leo said, scrolling through options on his phone. "There are better ways to spend money right now." Deanna set her coat down quietly. "You made the reservation." "Yeah, but that was before I started thinking more seriously about burn rate," he replied. Burn rate, a term that belonged to his company, now applied to their lives. "We can stay in," she said. Leo nodded. Exactly. He didn't notice that she hadn't disagreed. By the end of the week, the pattern had expanded. Leo began asking more questions, not directly, but often enough. "What did you spend today? Do you really need that subscription? Maybe hold off on that for now." Each question framed as concern, as planning, as responsibility. Deanna answered each one calmly, without defensiveness, without explanation, just enough to satisfy the moment. At Halstead, nothing about her behavior changed. She arrived on time, completed her work, spoke when necessary, observed always. But her observations had shifted focus, not outward, inward, toward the small adjustments that when viewed individually meant very little. But together, formed something else. Claire Donovan's presence became more consistent. At first, it was professional. Meetings, strategy sessions, calls that extended beyond normal hours. Then it became visible. Dinners that ran late. Messages that arrived at times that suggested proximity rather than distance. Leo didn't hide it. But he didn't present it clearly either. He allowed it to exist in a space where it could be explained if necessary, but not acknowledged unless forced. Deanna did not force it. One afternoon, Leo returned home earlier than expected. Claire was with him. "Hey," he said, his tone light, as if the situation required no preparation. "This is Claire." Deanna stood from the sofa, her posture composed. "Nice to meet you," she said. Claire smiled, extending her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." The statement was neutral, but incomplete. Deanna shook her hand. "I'm sure you have." A brief silence followed. Not awkward, just measured. Leo moved past it quickly. "We just needed to go over a few things," he said, gesturing toward the dining table. "Won't take long." Deanna nodded. "Take your time." She returned to her seat, opening her laptop without further comment. Across the room, Claire and Leo began discussing projections, their voices low but audible. Numbers, timelines, growth strategies. Deanna didn't listen to the content. She listened to the rhythm, the familiarity, the ease with which Claire spoke into Leo's decisions, the way Leo responded without questioning. It wasn't new. It was simply no longer hidden. Later, after Claire had left, Leo approached the sofa. "You okay?" he asked. Deanna looked up briefly. "Why wouldn't I be?" He hesitated. "I just didn't want it to feel strange." "It doesn't," she said. Leo nodded, reassured. "That's good," he replied. He didn't ask further. That night, after Leo had gone to sleep, Deanna opened her laptop. The document titled Timeline Carter-Leo appeared. She added a new entry, increased financial oversight, justified as business necessity. Another line. Donovan-Claire presence in personal space normalized. She paused, then added, subject unaware of pattern escalation. No judgment, no interpretation, only observation. Her phone vibrated. A message from Evelyn Grant. Documents updated. Evidence framework ready when needed. Deanna read it. Then typed a response. Continue monitoring. No action yet. She sent it without hesitation. The next morning, Leo stood in the kitchen reviewing something on his phone. "We should talk about accounts," he said, not looking up. Deanna poured coffee. "What about them? I think it makes sense to consolidate more," he replied. "For efficiency." Efficiency. Another word borrowed from his company. "And how would that work?" she asked. Leo glanced at her. "I'd just manage everything. It's easier that way. Less confusion." Deanna handed him a cup of coffee. "Whatever you think is best," she said. He smiled. "I knew you'd understand." At Halstead, Michael Reeves stopped by her desk again. "That logistics portfolio," he said. "It's gaining attention." Deanna looked up. "Transit Axis, among others," he replied. "There's a larger fund circling." He didn't name it. He didn't need to. Deanna already knew. "I'll finalize the analysis," she said. Michael nodded. "Good. We'll need it soon." That afternoon, Deanna received another message. Not from Evelyn. Not from Charles. From an internal system she rarely accessed directly. Whitmore Capital Strategic Interest confirmed. She opened it briefly. A list of potential investments. Transit Axis among them. Marked, flagged, not yet decided. She closed the file. Back at the apartment, Leo was animated. "Things are lining up," he said, pacing slightly. "There's real interest now. Bigger players." Deanna set her bag down. "That's good." It's more than good, he said. This is what we've been building toward. The word carried weight, even now. Deanna nodded. It is. Leo stopped pacing, looking at her more closely. You believe that, right? He asked. Deanna met his gaze. I believe you're seeing what you want to see, she said. Leo frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means, she replied calmly, you're confident. He studied her for a moment, then smiled. Confidence is necessary, he said. Deanna didn't disagree. That night, as the city moved quietly beyond the window, Deanna stood once again in the dim light of the living room. Her laptop remained closed. Her phone rested beside it. No messages, no alerts, just stillness. Behind her, Leo slept without interruption, unaware of the pattern he had created, unaware of how clearly it had formed, unaware that every small decision, every controlled adjustment, every unspoken shift had already been recorded. Not in a way he could see, not in a place he could access, but in a structure that did not forget. Deanna moved toward the window, her reflection faint against the glass. She wasn't thinking about Claire, or the credit cards, or the questions. Those were details, necessary, but not central. What mattered was the pattern, and the pattern was complete. She reached for her phone, opening a message thread. Evelyn Grant. Her fingers hovered for a moment. Then she typed, prepare for transition. She didn't send it, not yet. Instead, she locked the screen and set the phone down again. Because timing mattered. More than action, more than reaction. And the moment was not quite there, yet. The day of the signing did not arrive with tension. It arrived with precision. Leo Carter had chosen the setting carefully, Daniel Brooks's conference room again, but this time arranged for finality rather than discussion. The documents were printed, tabbed, and aligned in a neat stack at the center of the table. The atmosphere was quiet, deliberate, and unmistakably formal. Margaret Carter arrived first 10 minutes early, as if her presence alone could reinforce the significance of the moment. Sophie followed shortly after, her expression composed but alert, scanning the room as though anticipating something she could later recount. Leo stood near the window when Deanna entered. You're right on time, he said, glancing at his watch with a small, approving smile. I always am, she replied. Her voice carried no weight beyond the words themselves. Daniel Brooks stood as she approached the table. Miss Kelly, he said. Mr. Carter, Daniel Leo replied, already moving toward his seat. Deanna placed her bag down gently, her movements unhurried. The room settled into stillness, the kind that precedes decisions people believe they understand. Daniel cleared his throat softly. We're here to execute the agreement, he said. All parties have had the opportunity to review the terms. Before we proceed, I am required to confirm once more. We're ready, Leo said, cutting in just slightly. Daniel paused, then nodded. Very well. He opened the top document, turning it toward Leo first. Signature lines are marked, he said. Leo picked up the pen provided, standard functional, and signed without hesitation. His name moved across the page with practiced confidence, each letter firm, decisive. He placed the pen down. Done. Daniel turned the document toward Deanna. For a moment, no one spoke. Margaret watched closely, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady. Sophie leaned back slightly, arms crossed, observing with quiet interest. Leo looked at Deanna. Expectation, assumption, completion. Deanna reached into her bag. Not for the pen on the table, for the one she had brought. Black lacquer, gold trim. She held it briefly, adjusting it between her fingers as if confirming its balance. Then she opened the document. For the first time in any of these meetings, she looked at the pages. Not reading every line, but scanning, confirming. Not the terms, the structure, the placement of signatures, the order of execution. Daniel noticed. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched. Deanna turned to the final page. Her name was printed there, waiting. She positioned the pen, paused, not out of hesitation, but alignment. Then she signed, clean, even, unrushed. The ink settled into the paper as if it had always been there. She closed the document and placed the pen down beside it. For a fraction of a second, the room remained silent. Then Leo exhaled a quiet release of something he hadn't fully acknowledged. "That's it," he said. Margaret allowed herself a small nod, satisfaction contained but visible. Sophie uncrossed her arms, her expression softening into something closer to approval. Daniel gathered the documents, aligning them carefully. "Yes," he said. "That completes the execution." He looked at Deanna again just briefly, not questioning, not warning, just noting. Outside, the city continued without interruption. Traffic moved. People crossed streets. Conversations overlapped and dissolved into the background noise of Manhattan. Leo walked beside Deanna, his pace slightly quicker, his energy noticeably lighter. "That was easier than I thought," he said. Deanna adjusted the strap of her bag. "Was it?" "Yeah," he replied. "No complications, no delays." He glanced at her, smiling. "You handled it well." "I understood what was needed," she said. Leo nodded, satisfied by the answer he believed he heard. "We're in a good position now," he added. "Everything's clear. Clear." The word lingered. Deanna didn't correct it. They stopped at a cafe on the corner, Leo suggesting it without hesitation. "Let's grab something," he said. "We should celebrate. Celebrate." The word felt misplaced. But Deanna followed him inside anyway. They sat near the window. Leo ordered for both of them without asking something he had begun doing more often. 2 coffees, 1 pastry, efficiency, control. Deanna didn't object. She watched as Leo checked his phone, his expression shifting slightly as he read a message. A faint smile, quick, controlled. He locked the screen before placing the phone face down on the table. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just work." She nodded. No further questions. Back at the apartment, Leo moved through the space with a different kind of ease. Lighter, more assured. As if something intangible had been secured. He poured himself a drink, standing near the window. This was important, he said, more to himself than to her. Setting boundaries early. Deanna placed her bag down. "Yes," she said. "It was." He turned toward her. "You agree, right?" Deanna met his gaze. "I agree that it revealed what needed to be revealed," she said. Leo smiled, hearing only agreement. "Exactly." Later that evening, Claire Donovan's name appeared on Leo's phone again. This time, he didn't leave it on the counter. He stepped onto the balcony to take the call. The door closed behind him, muting the conversation, but not eliminating it entirely. Deanna remained inside, seated at the desk. She didn't try to listen. She didn't need to. When Leo returned, his expression carried a subtle shift, not visible to most, but consistent. "How was it?" he asked. "How was what?" Deanna replied. "The signing," he said. "For you." Deanna considered the question. "Accurate," she said. Leo nodded, as if that answer confirmed something positive. "Good," he replied. That night, after Leo had fallen asleep, Deanna opened her laptop. The screen illuminated the room just enough to define edges. She navigated to the document. Timeline, Carter Leo. A new entry, prenup executed. No negotiation. No independent counsel. Full compliance. She paused, then added, witnesses present. Carter Margaret. Carter Sophie. Brooks Daniel. Another line. Subject perception control achieved. She leaned back slightly, reading the entries, not for information, but for alignment. Everything was consistent. Everything was documented. Her phone vibrated. A message from Evelyn Grant. Execution confirmed. Deanna typed a response. Yes. A second message followed almost immediately. Proceed. Deanna's fingers hovered over the screen. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she typed, "Prepare next phase." No filings yet. She sent it. Across the room, Leo shifted in his sleep, unaware of the quiet shift that had just occurred. He believed the agreement had closed something, finalized it, protected it. He believed the structure now worked in his favor. And in a way it did, just not exclusively. Deanna closed the document and stood moving toward the window. The city stretched out before her lights, reflecting against the glass in fragmented patterns. She rested her hand lightly against the surface. Cool, still, unchanging. Behind her, everything appeared settled, organized, defined. But she knew better, because definitions only held value when they were tested. And what had been signed today would not remain static. It would be used, not loudly, not publicly, but precisely. On the desk behind her, the pen remained where she had placed it. Black lacquer, gold trim, a small object, easily overlooked, but chosen, intentionally, because some actions did not require explanation, only execution. Deanna turned away from the window, the room falling back into quiet shadow. She didn't think about the signing, not anymore. That moment had already served its purpose. What mattered now was what followed. Because agreements did not end stories. They began them. And this one had just begun to unfold. After the signing, nothing changed all at once. That was what made it easy to miss. Leo Carter did not become overtly different. He did not announce new rules or draw visible lines. Instead, the shift appeared in tone, in pacing, in the quiet confidence of someone who believed uncertainty had been removed. He spoke more decisively, interrupted less often, assumed agreement before it was given. The prenup in his mind had settled something fundamental. It had clarified position. And with clarity came entitlement. 3 days after the signing, Leo canceled a dinner Deanna had planned. "We don't need to be going out that much right now," he said, scrolling through his phone without looking up. "It's just not efficient." Deanna stood near the doorway, her coat still on. "You confirmed the reservation yesterday," she said. "Yeah, but things shift," he replied. "You have to adjust. Adjust." The word arrived without apology. Deanna removed her coat, slowly placing it back on the hanger. "Of course," she said. Leo glanced at her, briefly expecting something else. A question, a reaction, resistance. There was none. He nodded once satisfied and returned to his screen. At Halstead Advisory Group. Deanna's days remained unchanged on the surface. She completed her reports with the same precision, spoke when necessary, listened always. But her focus had sharpened. Transit Axis was no longer just another company under review. It had become a point of intersection. That afternoon, Michael Reeves called her into a meeting. "Whitmore Capital is moving faster than expected," he said, closing the door behind them. "They've requested deeper analysis on several early-stage firms." Deanna took a seat without comment. "Transit Axis is on the list," he added. A pause, measured. "Understood," she said. Michael studied her for a moment. "You've been thorough so far," he continued. "But this next round needs more detail. Risk exposure, leadership assessment, behavioral indicators. Behavioral indicators." The phrase carried more weight than he intended. "I'll expand the scope," Deanna replied. Michael nodded. "Good. We'll need it before the end of the week." Across the city, Leo stood in a conference room with Claire Donovan reviewing a revised pitch deck. "This is stronger," Claire said, tapping the screen lightly. "But you're still underselling the trajectory." Leo leaned back, arms crossed. It's realistic. Claire turned toward him, her expression sharpening just slightly. Realistic doesn't get funded, she said. Convincing does. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You need to present inevitability, she continued, not possibility. Leo watched her, absorbing the distinction. And the investors, he asked. They're watching how you carry it, she said. Confidence signals control. Control. The word aligned too easily with what Leo already believed. He nodded. Then we push it further. Claire smiled faintly. Exactly. That evening, Claire came to the apartment again. This time, she didn't hesitate at the door. Leo let her in without explanation. We just need an hour, he said to Deanna, already moving toward the dining table. Deanna sat on the sofa, her laptop open, but idle. Take your time, she said. Claire glanced at her, briefly offering a polite nod, before turning back to Leo. Their conversation began immediately. Numbers, strategy, language refined to persuade rather than inform. Deanna didn't listen to the content. She listened to the cadence, the familiarity, the ease. Claire spoke as if she already occupied space that hadn't been formally given. Leo responded as if that space was hers to take. At one point, Claire laughed softly at something Leo said. It was a small sound, but it carried. Deanna's gaze lifted briefly, then returned to the screen. No interruption, no acknowledgement, only observation. After Claire left, the apartment felt quieter than before. Leo stood near the kitchen, pouring himself a drink. She's good, he said almost casually. She understands how to position things. Deanna closed her laptop. She does, she replied. Leo glanced at her. You don't mind, right? Her being here like that? Deanna met his gaze. Should I? She asked. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. No, he said. It's just work. Then there's nothing to mind, she replied. Leo nodded, reassured by the absence of conflict. Later that night, after Leo had gone to bed, Deanna opened her laptop again. The document titled Timeline Carter-Leo appeared. She added, post-execution behavioral shift, increased authority, reduced consultation. Another line, Donovan-Claire integration into personal environment, normalized. She paused, then added, boundary erosion, gradual, unacknowledged. She read the entries once, then saved the document. A new window opened beside it. Secure, encrypted, Whitmore Capital. The interface loaded without delay. A notification appeared, Transit Axis Advanced Review Stage. She selected it. Inside, updated analyses, revised projections, a new section labeled Leadership Risk Assessment. She opened it. The content was clinical, detached, precise. Founder exhibits increasing overconfidence correlated with external validation. Decision-making influenced by advisory presence. Donovan-Claire. Risk of misaligned projections elevated. Deanna read without reaction, then closed the file. Her phone vibrated. A message from Evelyn Grant. Draft filings prepared. Awaiting confirmation to proceed. Deanna typed slowly. Not yet. Continue monitoring. She sent it. The next morning, Leo stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. We should talk about accounts again, he said, his tone casual. Deanna sat at the edge of the bed watching. What about them, she asked. I've been thinking, he said. It makes more sense if I handle everything directly. Centralized. Cleaner. Cleaner. Another word shaped by his perception of control. And what would change, she asked. Not much, he said. Just less overlap, less confusion. Deanna nodded. If that's what you prefer, she said. Leo smiled. It is. At Halstead, Michael approached her desk again. The Whitmore team wants a final recommendation by Monday, he said. No delays. Deanna looked up. Understood. He hesitated, then added, "They trust your assessment." Deanna held his gaze briefly. "They should," she said. Michael didn't question the confidence in her tone. That afternoon, Deanna received another internal update. Whitmore Capital conditional interest pending final approval. Transit access remained on the list. Not confirmed, not rejected, waiting. Back at the apartment, Leo was energized. "They're circling," he said, pacing slightly. "Bigger funds, real interest." Deanna placed her bag down. "That's what you wanted," she said. "It's happening faster than expected," he replied. "Everything's aligning." Aligning? The word suggested inevitability. Deanna watched him for a moment. "Is it?" she asked. Leo stopped pacing, frowning slightly. "What do you mean?" "It means," she said calmly, "alignment depends on more than momentum." He shook his head, dismissing the nuance. "You worry too much," he said. "This is exactly where we should be." Deanna didn't argue. She didn't need to. That night, as the city lights reflected against the window, Deanna stood alone once again. Her phone rested in her hand. Evelyn Grant's message thread open. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she typed, "Prepare execution framework." She paused, then added timing to follow. She sent it. Behind her, Leo slept without interruption. Unaware, confident, certain that everything was moving in the direction he intended. He believed the structure was stable, that control had been established, that outcomes could now be predicted. But Deanna understood something he did not. Control was not declared. It was demonstrated. And demonstration required a moment. A precise one. Not too early, not too late. Exactly when the pattern could no longer be denied. She placed the phone down her gaze, returning to the city beyond the glass. Movement, light, endless variation within predictable systems. Some patterns were visible. Others required patience. And this one was nearly complete. Momentum had a way of convincing people they were in control. Leo Carter felt it in the pace of his days. Calls that stacked back to back. Emails that arrived faster than he could answer them. Introductions made through people who had once ignored him. It all felt like validation, like proof that the trajectory Claire had described was not only possible but already underway. He began to move differently. Faster, more certain, less inclined to question the steps that brought him forward. The Series A preparation consumed him. Deck revisions, financial models, investor calls scheduled with increasing frequency. Claire Donovan became a constant presence not just as an advisor, but as a voice that shaped how Leo saw his own company. "You need to stop thinking like you're asking for something," she said during one of their late meetings. "You're offering access." Leo nodded, repeating the phrase under his breath. "Offering access." Claire watched him, then added, "And access implies scarcity. Make them feel like they're competing to be in the room." He adjusted the slide accordingly. Language mattered, framing mattered, perception mattered. And Leo believed he was mastering all three. At Halstead, Deanna finalized her expanded analysis. The report was longer than required, more detailed. Not because the firm demanded it, because the structure demanded it. She reviewed the final section again. Leadership risk assessment. The language remained precise, measured, detached. But within it, the pattern was clear, not dramatic, not exaggerated, simply evident. She closed the file and sent it through the internal system without comment. Minutes later, a confirmation appeared. Received Whitmore Capital Review Team. No acknowledgement beyond that, none was necessary. That afternoon, Deanna stepped out of the office earlier than usual. Not to meet Leo, not to go home, but to walk. The city moved around her with its usual indifference. People passed without recognition. Conversations overlapped and dissolved into noise. She didn't hurry. She didn't check her phone. She simply moved through the streets, observing. Patterns were easier to see from a distance. Across the city, Leo sat in a glass-walled conference room with 3 potential investors. Claire stood beside him, not speaking unless necessary, but present enough to shape the tone of the room. Leo moved through his presentation with confidence. Growth projections, market opportunity, strategic positioning. He spoke as if the outcomes were already decided. One of the investors leaned forward. "What's your current exposure to volatility?" he asked. Leo answered immediately. "Minimal." Claire's gaze flickered toward him just briefly. Not disagreement, adjustment. Another investor asked, "And leadership scalability? How are you planning to expand decision-making capacity?" Leo smiled. "We're already building that structure." He didn't mention Claire. He didn't need to. Her presence was implied. Later, as the meeting ended, the investors exchanged looks. Not negative, not fully convinced, interested, evaluating. "Send us the updated projections," one of them said. "We'll review internally." Leo nodded. "Of course." As they left, Claire turned to him. "You held it," she said. Leo exhaled. "They're in." Claire didn't confirm. "They're considering," she said. "That's the step you needed." Leo nodded, accepting the distinction. That evening, Leo returned home energized. "They're interested," he said as soon as Deanna walked in. Real interest. Deanna set her bag down. "That's good," she said. "It's more than good," he replied. "This is the turning point." Turning point. The phrase carried weight. Deanna looked at him. "Is it?" she asked. Leo frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "It means," she said calmly, "interest isn't commitment." He waved it off. "It will be." She didn't argue. Later that night, Leo sat at the dining table reviewing emails. Claire's name appeared again. "You handled the room well. Don't lose that edge." He smiled faintly, replying quickly. Across the room, Deanna watched without appearing to. Not the message, the reaction, the timing, the pattern. After Leo went to bed, Deanna opened her laptop. The secure interface loaded without delay. Whitmore Capital. A new notification, transit access. Internal deliberation stage. She opened the file. Updated notes appeared. Investor feedback. Risk assessments refined. A final section, conditional pathways. She read carefully. 3 options: proceed, delay, decline. Each outlined with precision. Each dependent on variables Leo could not see. Her phone vibrated. A call. Charles Whitmore. She answered. "Yes. The report has been reviewed," he said. I expected that she replied. "And your position?" Deanna looked toward the window. "Unchanged," she said. A pause. "Then timing becomes the question," Charles said. "Yes," Deanna replied. "And you're ready?" She didn't answer immediately. Not because she was uncertain. Because readiness was not about her. "It's almost there," she said. Charles didn't ask what there meant. He didn't need to. "Then we wait," he said. "Yes," Deanna agreed. The call ended. The next morning, Leo stood in the kitchen, scrolling through updates. "They want another meeting," he said. "More detailed numbers." Deanna poured coffee. "That's expected," she said. "It means they're serious," he replied. "It means they're evaluating," she corrected. Leo looked at her irritation flickering briefly. "Why do you always say it like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "Like it's not happening," he said. Deanna handed him the coffee. "I'm saying it hasn't happened yet," she replied. He shook his head, dismissing it. "It will." At Halstead, Michael approached her desk again. "The Whitmore team is close to a decision," he said quietly. "Very close." Deanna nodded. Understood. He hesitated. "They trust your assessment," he repeated. Deanna met his gaze. "They should," she said again. That afternoon, a final internal update appeared. Transit access, pending final authorization. No further detail, no timeline, just a threshold. Back at the apartment, Leo was restless. Pacing, checking his phone, waiting. "They'll come through," he said more to himself than to Deanna. She sat quietly, her posture unchanged. "They might," she said. He stopped pacing. "Why do you say it like that?" he asked again. Deanna looked at him. "Because outcomes depend on more than belief," she said. Leo exhaled sharply. "You don't get it." Deanna didn't respond. She didn't need to. That night, as the city moved beyond the glass, Deanna stood alone once more, her phone in her hand. The message thread with Evelyn Grant open. No new messages, no urgency, just readiness. She typed slowly. "Prepare final sequence." She paused, then added execution imminent. She didn't send it immediately. She waited. For a moment that could not be forced, only recognized. Behind her, Leo sat at the table refreshing his inbox again. Waiting for confirmation, for validation, for the outcome he believed was already his. He didn't see the pattern closing around him, didn't recognize the convergence of decisions already made beyond his reach. He believed he was at the center of the process. He wasn't. Deanna sent the message. The screen dimmed. The room returned to stillness. She looked out at the city, lights shifting, movement continuing, unaware, but aligned. Because the moment Leo was waiting for was already being decided. Just not by him. Public spaces had a way of revealing what private rooms concealed. Leo chose the venue carefully. A mid-sized industry event in Lower Manhattan. Not extravagant, but curated enough to gather attention. Founders, early-stage investors, consultants, analysts, people who watched each other as much as they listened. It was the kind of room where perception could shift in minutes. And Leo intended to control it. The lighting was bright, but softened by glass reflections. Conversations moved in controlled clusters. Laughter rose and fell in measured intervals, never too loud, never too unguarded. Leo stood near the center, a glass in hand, speaking with two investors who had attended his recent presentation. Claire Donovan stood beside him, slightly angled toward the conversation, her posture relaxed, but intentional. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Her presence alone shaped the interaction. "And your projections assume a 6-month expansion window," one of the investors asked. Leo nodded. "Conservative estimate." Claire's gaze flickered toward him briefly, not disagreement, adjustment. "Based on current traction," Leo added, correcting the tone. The investor smiled faintly. "Of course." Across the room, Deanna entered without drawing attention. She wore nothing that demanded recognition. A dark dress, tailored but understated. Minimal jewelry. No visible signals of status. She didn't approach Leo immediately. She didn't need to. Instead, she moved along the perimeter, acknowledging a few familiar faces from Halstead, with brief nods exchanging polite greetings that carried no weight beyond courtesy. She observed. Not the surface. The structure beneath it. Who spoke first? Who listened? Who deferred? Who assumed? At 8:17 p.m., her phone vibrated. She stepped aside near a column where the light softened. An email. Subject, Final Authorization. Whitmore Capital. She opened it. No greeting, no excess language. Just a confirmation. Control position verified. Execution window open. Attached a set of documents. Legal frameworks. Investment terms. Authority confirmations. Everything aligned. Everything ready. Deanna read it once, then closed the screen. No visible reaction, only stillness. Back at the center of the room, Leo's voice carried slightly above the others. We're not just building a product, he was saying. We're defining a category. Claire glanced at him, her expression unreadable but attentive. The investors nodded, not fully convinced but engaged. Momentum. That was what Leo believed he had. Deanna approached slowly. Not directly, not abruptly. She moved into the edge of the group, her presence registering only when she was already there. Leo noticed her. "Hey," he said, his tone shifting just slightly. "You made it. I said I would," she replied. One of the investors glanced at her. "Deanna, right?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." Leo gestured lightly. "She works in finance." The description was accurate, but incomplete. The investor extended his hand. "Good to meet you." "And you," Deanna said. Claire watched the exchange carefully. Not the words, the recognition. The way the investor's tone carried a subtle shift, respect, unexplained. "Actually," the investor said, turning slightly, "we've seen your name come up in internal notes recently." Leo's expression changed, just for a moment. "What do you mean?" he asked. The investor hesitated, as if reconsidering how much to say. "Nothing formal," he said. "Just alignment with some larger reviews." Deanna didn't respond. She didn't need to. Claire's gaze sharpened. "Which reviews?" she asked. The investor smiled faintly. "The kind that matter." Leo let out a small laugh, attempting to regain control of the moment. "Well," he said, "that's good news for us." The investor didn't confirm, didn't deny. He simply nodded. "Possibly," he said. A brief silence followed. Not long, but enough. Claire stepped in smoothly. "We're finalizing updated projections this week," she said. "You'll have everything you need." The investor nodded. "We'll be reviewing closely." He glanced once more at Deanna, then stepped away. Leo turned to her. "What was that?" he asked. Deanna met his gaze. "A conversation," she said. "That's not what I meant," he replied. "I know," she said. Claire watched them both. "You didn't mention your connections," she said to Deanna. Deanna looked at her. "I don't mention things that aren't necessary," she replied. Claire held her gaze for a moment longer than usual, then smiled. Professional, controlled. "I see," she said. The rest of the evening continued. Conversations resumed. Introductions made. But something had shifted. Subtly, quietly. Leo felt it, though he couldn't define it. A hesitation in responses. A slight recalibration in tone. As if the room had adjusted its perception without announcing it. At 9:42 p.m., Deanna's phone vibrated again. A message from Evelyn Grant. All documents ready, awaiting final instruction. Deanna read it, then typed, "Stand by." She didn't send more. She didn't need to. Leo approached her again near the end of the evening. "You were quiet," he said. "I usually am," she replied. He nodded, but there was a hint of unease now. "Those investors," he said. "What did they mean?" Deanna looked toward the exit, then back at him. "They meant what they said," she replied. "That doesn't explain anything," he said. "It explains enough," she said. Claire joined them again, her presence measured. "We should head out," she said to Leo. "Early meeting tomorrow." Leo nodded. "Yeah." He glanced at Deanna. "You coming? I'll follow later," she said. He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." As Leo and Claire left together, their conversation continued in low tones, already shifting back to strategy projections, next steps. Deanna remained. Not for the event, for the moment. She moved toward a quieter corner away from the remaining guests, her phone in her hand. The email still open. Execution window open. She read the line again. Not for information, for confirmation. Then she opened a new message. Evelyn Grant. Her fingers moved without hesitation. Proceed. She paused, then added full sequence. She sent it. Across the city, systems began to move. Not visibly, not loudly, but precisely. Legal filings prepared for submission, financial structures activated, authority lines clarified. Everything that had been waiting, now in motion. Deanna closed her phone and looked out through the glass. The city reflected back at her in fragmented light. Unaware, unchanged, but already shifting beneath the surface. Because Leo believed the evening had been about visibility, about positioning, about momentum. He believed he had taken a step forward. He hadn't realized he had just stepped into the moment where everything would be measured. Not by what he said, but by what could be proven. And that proof was already on its way. The meeting was scheduled for 9:00 a.m., not 9:05. Not around 9. Exactly 9. Leo Carter arrived at 8:42, early enough to feel prepared, not early enough to appear uncertain. The conference room was on the 31st floor of a building that did not display its significance on the outside. Inside, everything was quiet-controlled, designed for decisions that did not need explanation. Glass walls, minimal decor, a long table with no visible imperfections. Claire Donovan stood near the window when he entered, reviewing something on her tablet. "You're early," she said without looking up. "So are you," Leo replied. Claire glanced at him, then returned to the screen. "They'll notice that." Leo set his laptop down. "Good." She didn't respond. At 8:58, the door opened. Two individuals entered first, not rushed, not hesitant, followed by a third. Their presence did not announce authority. It assumed it. "Mr. Carter," one of them said, extending a hand. "Good to meet you," Leo replied. Introductions were brief. Names given but not emphasized. Titles implied rather than stated. They took their seats. Claire remained standing for a moment longer, then sat beside Leo, her posture composed. At 9:00, the door closed. No one else entered. "Let's begin," one of the investors said. Leo opened his laptop, the presentation already prepared. He moved through it smoothly, confident, structured, every slide aligned with the narrative. Claire had helped him refine. Growth trajectory, market opportunity, scalability. He spoke as if the outcome had already been decided, as if this meeting were a confirmation, not a question. Across the table, the investors listened, not interrupting, not reacting visibly, just observing, taking notes that Leo could not see. At 9:23, the presentation ended. Leo leaned back slightly, allowing a moment of silence to settle. "Questions?" he asked. The word carried confidence, expectation. One of the investors glanced at the others, then forward again. "Your projections assume rapid expansion within 6 months," he said. Leo nodded. "Based on current traction." A brief pause. "And your current liquidity position?" the investor asked. Leo answered without hesitation. "Stable." Claire's gaze shifted slightly. Not disagreement, awareness. Another investor spoke. "Tell us about your governance structure." Oh, Leo straightened. "We're building a framework that supports scale." "Who holds decision authority?" the investor asked. Leo smiled. "I do currently." "And advisory influence?" the investor continued. Leo hesitated. "Not long. Strategic input is considered," he said. "But final decisions remain internal." Claire didn't move. But something in the room adjusted. At 9:31, the door opened again. No one had announced it. No one had expected it. Deanna Kelly stepped inside. She didn't rush, didn't apologize, didn't explain. She simply entered, closing the door behind her with quiet precision. The room shifted. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. Leo turned. "What are you doing here?" he asked. The question came out sharper than he intended. Deanna met his gaze. "I was invited," she said. Silence followed. One of the investors leaned back slightly, watching the exchange. Claire's posture remained unchanged, but her attention sharpened. "Please," the same investor said, gesturing toward an empty chair. "Join us." Deanna took the seat without hesitation. No introduction was made. None was required. Leo looked between them. "What's going on?" he asked. The investor folded his hands on the table. "We're clarifying structure," he said. Leo frowned. "We already covered that." "Yes," the investor replied. "From your perspective." A document was placed on the table. Not slid, placed, centered, deliberate. "This is our preliminary position," the investor said. Leo reached for it, scanning the first page quickly. His expression didn't change immediately. Then it did. Subtly, controlled, but visible. "What is this?" he asked. "An updated framework," the investor said. "For what?" Leo pressed. "For investment," the investor replied. Leo's gaze moved across the page again. Terms, conditions, authority lines. Then he saw it. A name. Not his. Whitmore Capital. He looked up. "That's not who we've been talking to," he said. The investor didn't respond immediately. "Then it is now." Leo turned toward Claire. She didn't meet his gaze. Not immediately. When she did, her expression remained composed. "We knew there were larger interests," she said. "That's not an answer," Leo replied. "No," she said. "It's context." Deanna remained still. Her hands rested lightly on the table. Not tense, not reactive. Present. The investor spoke again. "Whitmore Capital holds controlling interest in this round," he said. "Any decision proceeds through them." Leo shook his head slightly. "That's not how this works," he said. "It is now," the investor repeated. Leo's gaze moved to Deanna. "Why are you here?" he asked. Deanna held his gaze. "Because this is where the decision is being made," she said. Silence, not empty, just precise. Another document was placed on the table. "This outlines the full structure," the investor said. Leo didn't reach for it immediately. He looked at Deanna instead. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked. Deanna didn't answer right away. She didn't rush to fill the silence, because silence in that moment carried more weight than explanation. Then calmly, "You signed an agreement based on what you believed you controlled," she said. Leo frowned. "What does that have to do with this?" "Everything," she replied. Claire leaned forward slightly. "What is she talking about?" she asked. The investor answered. "Miss Kelly is the primary beneficiary of the Whitmore Trust," he said. The words landed, not loudly, but completely. Leo stared at him. "No," he said. The response came too quickly, too certain. The investor continued. "The trust holds controlling positions across multiple entities, including Whitmore Capital." Leo shook his head again. "That's not possible," he said. Deanna didn't correct him. She didn't confirm. She simply remained still. "Your agreement," the investor added, "demonstrates a clear position regarding asset control and financial separation." Leo's eyes moved back to the document. Then to Deanna. "You knew," he said. Deanna met his gaze. "I understood," she replied. The distinction mattered, even if Leo didn't recognize it yet. The room remained quiet. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. Claire looked between them, recalculating. Fast, precise, but not fast enough. Leo leaned back slightly, his hand still resting on the document. The paper no longer felt like leverage. It felt like something else. "What happens now?" he asked. The question came out lower, less certain. The investor answered. "Now," he said, "we evaluate whether alignment still exists." Deanna didn't speak. She didn't need to, because alignment was no longer something Leo defined. And for the first time since the prenup had been signed, Leo realized that the structure he believed protected him was no longer his to control. The silence that followed did not feel accidental. It carried the kind of weight that only appears when something irreversible has already taken place, even if the people inside the room have not yet fully understood it. Leo Carter remained seated, his hands still resting on the document in front of him, but the confidence that had shaped his posture earlier was no longer anchored in anything stable. He was no longer presenting. He was no longer persuading. He was trying quietly to reassemble a structure that had already shifted beyond his reach. Across the table, the investors did not rush to fill the space with explanation. Their restraint was not indifference, but discipline. They had seen moments like this before, where information arrived, not as a gradual realization, but as a single point of clarity that forced everything else to reorganize around it. Claire Donovan, who had built her influence on anticipating patterns before others could name them, remained composed on the surface. Yet her attention had sharpened into something more analytical, as if she were recalculating every assumption she had made about Leo, about the company, and about the unseen forces now present in the room. Deanna Kelly did not move. Her posture remained steady, her hands resting lightly on the table. Not gripping, not tense, simply present. She did not look at the documents again because she already knew what they contained. She did not look away from Leo either because avoidance would have implied hesitation. Instead, she allowed the moment to exist as it was, without interruption, without correction, without any attempt to guide his understanding toward a more comfortable interpretation. Leo finally spoke, but his voice no longer carried the same certainty it had earlier. "You're saying that she controls the investment," he said, directing the statement toward the investors, but his eyes remained on Deanna. The phrasing suggested resistance, not inquiry, as though he needed the words to be reframed into something that could still fit within his previous assumptions. The investor who had spoken earlier inclined his head slightly, not in concession, but in acknowledgement of the question's shape. "We are saying that the controlling position flows through the Whitmore Trust," he replied, choosing each word with deliberate precision, "and that Miss Kelly is the primary beneficiary of that structure. Operational authority is exercised through Whitmore Capital, which is the entity you are engaging with." Leo exhaled slowly, as if the act itself might stabilize the moment. He looked down again at the document, scanning the lines that now seemed to hold a different meaning than they had minutes earlier. The terms had not changed. The language had not shifted. But the context had expanded, and with it the implications had become impossible to ignore. Claire leaned forward slightly, her tone controlled, but no longer neutral. "Why wasn't this disclosed earlier?" she asked, directing the question toward the investors, though the underlying inquiry extended beyond them. It was not simply about information. It was about leverage, about timing, about the architecture of the process itself. The investor did not react defensively. "Disclosure aligns with stage and relevance," he said. "At this point, alignment requires full visibility." Claire absorbed the answer without interruption, though it did not resolve what she needed it to resolve. She turned her attention briefly to Deanna, studying her not as a peripheral figure, but as a central variable that had been overlooked. Leo's voice returned quieter, now less controlled. "You let this happen," he said, addressing Deanna directly. It was not an accusation framed with clarity, but a statement shaped by the need to assign direction to something he could no longer contain. Deanna did not respond immediately. She allowed the statement to settle, not because she needed time to think, but because the timing of a response mattered more than the content. When she spoke, her tone remained even not defensive, not corrective. "I allowed you to proceed with the decisions you chose to make," she said. "I did not interfere with your understanding of them." The distinction was subtle, but it carried more weight than a direct denial would have. Leo's expression tightened not in anger, but in the recognition that the ground he had been standing on was no longer stable. "You signed the prenup," he said, as if returning to a point he believed still held authority. "You agreed to everything." "Yes," Deanna replied, her voice steady. "I signed the agreement as it was presented." The investor spoke again, not to interrupt, but to clarify. The agreement demonstrates position, he said. It reflects how each party defined value control and risk at the time of execution. Leo turned toward him, frustration now more visible. That agreement protects my assets, he said. That's the point. The investor did not contradict him. It defines them, he said. Protection depends on context. Claire's gaze shifted between them, following the thread of the conversation with increasing precision. She understood perhaps more quickly than Leo that the prenup had not been neutral. It had been a declaration, one that now existed as part of a larger framework that neither of them had fully accounted for. Deanna remained still, but her attention did not waver. She was not observing the content of the argument anymore. She was observing the pattern of response, the way Leo returned to the same point, the same assumption, as though repetition could restore its authority. "You think this changes everything," Leo said. His voice lower now, directed at her, though it carried the weight of the entire room. Deanna considered the statement carefully before answering. "It clarifies everything," she said. Again, the distinction mattered. Clarification did not introduce something new. It revealed what had already been present. The investor placed another document on the table, this one thinner, more focused. "This outlines the proposed terms under Whitmore Capital's participation," he said. "Control, governance, and capital structure are defined here." Leo did not reach for it immediately. His attention remained on Deanna, as if the document itself had become secondary to the realization unfolding in front of him. Claire, however, reached for it, scanning the first page quickly. Her expression did not change dramatically, but her posture adjusted slightly, as though she were aligning herself with a new set of variables. She read further, then looked up. "This shifts majority control," she said. The investor nodded. "Under the proposed structure?" "Yes." Leo finally picked up the document, his movements slower now, less certain. He read the first lines, then the next, his eyes moving faster than his comprehension could stabilize. "That's not acceptable," he said, though the statement lacked the firmness it would have carried earlier. The investor did not respond immediately. "Acceptance depends on alignment," he said. "Alignment depends on trust." The word trust settled into the room with quiet precision. Leo looked up again, his gaze returning to Deanna. "Was this the plan?" he asked. Deanna held his gaze, not avoiding, not softening. "There was no plan beyond observing how you defined your position," she said. "Everything that followed came from that." Leo's expression shifted again, not into anger, but into something closer to recognition. Not full understanding, not yet, but the beginning of it. Because the agreement he had insisted on, the structure he had believed would protect him, had not been neutral. It had been a statement of how he viewed value, how he measured contribution, how he assigned trust. And now that statement existed within a larger system that did not ignore it. Claire closed the document slowly, placing it back on the table. She did not speak immediately because she understood that the conversation had already moved beyond negotiation into something else. The investors remained still, waiting, not for an answer, but for a shift. Deanna did not move, did not speak again because she did not need to. The moment had already revealed what it needed to reveal. And Leo, for the first time, was no longer certain that he understood the position he was standing in. The room did not fracture. It recalibrated. That difference mattered, even if Leo Carter did not yet have the language to articulate it. What had once felt like a negotiation now moved with the quiet structure of an evaluation, and within that shift, his position changed without anyone announcing it directly. He remained seated at the same table, holding the same documents, but the weight of them no longer rested where he believed it should. Claire Donovan was the first to adjust fully. She had built her reputation on recognizing momentum early, but she had also survived long enough in that space to understand when momentum no longer belonged to her client. Her posture remained composed, but her focus narrowed her attention, moving from Leo to the investors, then briefly to Deanna, as though she were mapping a structure that had been hidden until now. "We need to clarify the terms of control," Claire said, her tone measured no longer aligned with Leo's earlier certainty, but not openly opposed to it either. If Whitmore Capital's taking a controlling position, then governance needs to be explicitly defined beyond what is outlined here. The investor who had been leading the discussion nodded slightly, acknowledging the shift in tone. "Governance is defined within the full structure," he said, gesturing toward the documents already on the table. "Board composition, voting thresholds, and capital allocation authority are all addressed. What remains is whether the founder is aligned with those terms." The phrasing was deliberate. Not whether Leo agreed, whether he was aligned. Leo leaned forward, his fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the document, not enough to appear unstable, but enough to signal that his control over the situation was no longer intuitive. "I built this company," he said, the statement emerging as a defense rather than a declaration. "I'm not giving up control of it because of a late-stage shift in investors." No one interrupted him. That more than anything emphasized the change. When he had spoken earlier, responses came quickly, shaping and reinforcing his direction. Now his words were allowed to exist on their own, without support, without correction. The investor responded only after a moment, his tone unchanged. "You are not being asked to give up control without context," he said. "You are being presented with a structure that reflects the scale of capital and the associated risk. Control in this context is proportional." Leo exhaled slowly, as though the explanation did not resolve the problem, but instead expanded it. His gaze shifted again to Deanna, not because she had spoken recently, but because she had not. Her stillness had become its own form of presence, one that did not compete for attention, but held it nonetheless. "You knew this would happen," he said, his voice quieter now. Less performative, more direct. Deanna did not answer immediately. She allowed the question to settle, not because she needed time, but because the moment itself required it. When she spoke, her tone remained consistent, neither defensive nor explanatory. "I knew that decisions have consequences," she said, "and that those consequences would eventually become visible." Leo shook his head slightly, not in denial, but in resistance to the simplicity of the answer. "That's not the same thing," he said. "It is," she replied, not raising her voice, not adding emphasis, simply stating the position as it existed. Claire observed the exchange closely, her attention shifting again, recalculating. She understood now that the leverage she had believed belonged to Leo had never been stable, and that the presence of Whitmore Capital was not an opportunity to be shaped, but a structure that already existed. "We need to consider alternatives," Claire said, turning back toward the investors. "If alignment is the issue, then there may be ways to restructure participation without requiring immediate control transfer." The investor did not dismiss the suggestion, but he did not engage with it fully either. "Alternatives can be explored," he said, "but they do not change the underlying assessment. The company's trajectory is promising, but leadership risk has been identified. The structure reflects that assessment." The phrase leadership risk settled into the room with quiet clarity. Leo's posture stiffened slightly. "What does that mean?" he asked, though the question carried more than curiosity. It carried the first trace of recognition that the evaluation extended beyond numbers. The investor glanced briefly at the document, then back at Leo. "It means that decision-making patterns, external influence, and strategic consistency have been evaluated alongside financial projections," he said. "And those factors inform how capital is deployed." Claire did not look at Leo when the explanation was given. She did not need to. She already understood the implication. Leo, however, felt it immediately. His gaze moved toward Claire, then back to the investors, then finally to Deanna, as though trying to locate the point where the narrative had shifted without his awareness. "You're basing that on what he asked?" The investor did not hesitate. Undocumented behavior, he said. On communication patterns. On observed influence. Leo's expression changed not dramatically, but enough to reveal the shift beneath it. "You've been watching," he said. "Yes," the investor replied. "That is part of the process." The answer was simple, but it carried a depth that Leo had not accounted for. The meetings, the conversations, the adjustments he had made under Claire's guidance, the decisions he had framed as confidence rather than uncertainty, all of it had been observed, recorded, and interpreted within a system that did not rely on his perception of it. Claire leaned back slightly, her posture no longer aligned with Leo's position, but not entirely separate from it either. She was repositioning, not withdrawing, but adjusting to a structure that no longer centered him. "This isn't just about capital," she said quietly. No, the investor agreed. "It is not." Deanna remained still, her attention steady, not because she needed to assert control, but because control had already shifted into a space that did not require visible assertion. She had not interrupted, had not corrected, had not introduced new information beyond what was necessary. And yet the structure of the room had reorganized around her presence. Leo looked at her again, his voice lower, now stripped of the earlier confidence. "So what happens if I don't agree?" he asked. The investor answered not with pressure, but with clarity. "Then the investment does not proceed under these terms," he said. "And Whitmore Capital allocates resources elsewhere." The statement was not a threat. It was a condition. Leo understood that. And for the first time, he also understood that the opportunity he had been working toward was no longer something he could shape on his own terms. Claire did not intervene. She had reached the point where intervention would not restore the previous structure. The only question that remained was whether Leo could recognize the shift in time to respond to it. Deanna did not speak again because she did not need to. The documents were already on the table. The pattern had already been established, and the outcome, while not yet declared, had already begun to take form within a system that no longer required Leo's belief to function. The meeting did not end with a decision. It ended with recognition. Leo Carter remained seated for a few seconds after the investors began gathering their documents, as though the physical act of standing required a certainty he no longer possessed. Claire Donovan closed her tablet with measured precision. Her movements controlled her expression, composed in a way that concealed calculation rather than emotion. Deanna Kelly did not move immediately either, but her stillness was different. It did not come from hesitation. It came from completion. The investors stood without urgency. There were no raised voices, no abrupt conclusions, no visible pressure applied. One of them inclined his head slightly toward Leo. "You have the framework," he said. "Take the time you need to evaluate alignment." The phrasing remained consistent. Alignment, not agreement, not persuasion. Leo nodded, though the gesture lacked the conviction it would have carried earlier. "I'll review it," he said, the words sounding more procedural than decisive. "That would be appropriate," the investor replied. There was no further discussion, no attempt to reframe the terms. The meeting concluded not because everything had been resolved, but because nothing more needed to be said in that room. Outside the building, the city continued without pause. Cars moved through intersections. Pedestrians crossed streets with practiced rhythm. Conversations unfolded and dissolved into the surrounding noise. None of it reflected what had just taken place, 31 floors above. Leo stepped onto the sidewalk, his pace slower than usual, as though the ground beneath him required confirmation. Claire followed beside him, her attention already shifting forward, analyzing what came next rather than what had just occurred. "They're not rejecting the deal," Leo said after a moment, his voice searching for stability within the interpretation. Claire did not respond immediately. She adjusted the strap of her bag, her gaze directed ahead. "They're redefining it," she said finally. Leo exhaled, the sound uneven. "That's not the same thing." "No," Claire replied. "It's not." The distinction lingered between them. Leo turned slightly toward her. "We can push back," he said. "We don't have to accept those terms." Claire stopped walking. For a brief moment, she studied him, not with dismissal, but with clarity that no longer aligned with his position. "We can respond," she said carefully, "but pushing back implies leverage." Leo frowned. "We have leverage." Claire held his gaze. "Not in the way you think," she said. The words were not harsh. They did not need to be. Leo looked away first. Deanna exited the building a few steps behind them. She did not call out. She did not accelerate to catch up. She allowed distance to exist because distance now carried its own definition. Leo noticed her eventually. "Deanna," he said, turning back. She approached at the same steady pace she had maintained all morning. "We need to talk," he added. She stopped a few feet away, her posture composed. "We are talking," she said. Leo ran a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically unstructured. All of this," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the building behind them. You knew where it was going. Deanna did not answer immediately. "I understood the direction," she said. "That's not the same thing," he replied. "No," she said. "It's more precise." Leo's expression tightened. "You could have told me." Deanna met his gaze without shifting. "What would that have changed?" she asked. The question was not rhetorical. It was exact. Leo hesitated. Not because he did not want to answer, but because he did not have one. Claire watched the exchange, her position now clearly separate, though she did not step away. She understood that the conversation had moved beyond strategy and into something that could not be managed through framing or projection. "You let me walk into that room," Leo said, his voice lower now, less certain, more direct. Deanna's tone remained unchanged. "You chose to enter it," she replied. The difference once again was subtle, but it carried weight. The silence that followed did not feel unresolved. It felt complete. Leo looked at her, searching for something, an explanation, an apology, a correction that would restore the structure he had relied on. He found none. "What happens now?" he asked. Deanna considered the question not because she needed time, but because the answer required precision. "That depends on your decision," she said. Leo exhaled slowly. "And if I don't agree to their terms, then the investment does not proceed," she replied. "And you?" he asked. The question landed differently. Not about the company, about them. Deanna did not look away. "I proceed as well," she said. The meaning was clear, not dramatic, not emphasized, just stated. Claire stepped back slightly, creating space that had not existed before. "I have another meeting," she said, her tone neutral, professional, already detached from the situation. "Leo, we'll talk later." Leo nodded automatically, though his attention remained on Deanna. Claire left without further comment. The street felt quieter after she was gone. Not because the city had changed, because the structure of the moment had. Leo stood there, the documents still in his hand, no longer certain what they represented. "I built something," he said, almost to himself. Deanna listened. "You did," she said. "And now I'm supposed to just hand it over," he continued. Deanna's gaze remained steady. "You're being asked to define what matters more," she said. "Control or continuation?" Leo shook his head slightly. "It's not that simple." "No," she replied. "It never was." A car passed between them, the brief interruption creating a momentary separation. When it was gone, nothing had changed. Not visibly. But something had settled. Leo looked at her again, his voice quieter now, stripped of earlier certainty. "Was any of this real?" he asked. Deanna did not answer immediately, because the question was not about the meeting. It was about everything that came before it. When you chose what to value, she said finally, that was real. Leo's expression shifted not into understanding, but into the beginning of it. She stepped back slightly, creating distance that no longer needed explanation. "I'll have my attorney follow up," she added. The statement was procedural, but it carried finality. Leo didn't respond. He didn't know how. Deanna turned and walked away. Not quickly, not slowly, just forward. The city moved around her as it always did, unchanged, indifferent, continuous. Behind her, Leo remained standing on the sidewalk, the document still in his hand, no longer certain what they secured. Because what he had believed was protection had become definition. And definition, once established, did not require argument. It only required recognition. The legal process did not begin with confrontation. It began with documentation. 3 days after the meeting, Leo Carter received an email from a law firm he did not recognize at first glance. The subject line was neutral, almost administrative in tone. "Notice of representation, Kelly Deanna." He opened it expecting clarification about the investment. Instead, he found structure. The message outlined in precise and unembellished language that Deanna Kelly had retained counsel under Evelyn Grant for matters concerning marital dissolution. Attached were preliminary filings. No accusations, no emotional language. Only a framework that established jurisdiction, intent, and the beginning of a process that would move forward regardless of reaction. Leo read the document twice, not because it was complex, but because it was complete. He did not call immediately. He sat at the edge of the bed, the phone still in his hand, as though the act of responding would require a version of certainty he had not yet recovered. At Halstead, Deanna continued her work as though nothing had shifted. Her reports were submitted on time. Her meetings remained brief and efficient. Her tone did not change. Michael Reeves stopped by her desk that morning, holding a printed summary. "Whitmore Capital has declined transit access under the proposed structure," he said. Deanna looked up. "Under that structure," she repeated. Michael nodded. "They're reallocating resources." He hesitated for a moment. "You knew this might happen?" he asked. Deanna held his gaze. "I knew the outcome would reflect the evaluation," she said. Michael accepted the answer without pressing further. In his world, decisions were rarely explained beyond what was necessary. "Good work on the analysis," he said. Then he left. Leo eventually called. Not immediately after reading the email. Not that day. The following evening, Deanna answered, "Yes." He did not begin with a greeting. "You filed," he said. "Yes," she replied. The simplicity of the confirmation left no space for misinterpretation. Leo exhaled slowly. "You're serious?" he said. "I am proceeding," she answered. Again, the distinction mattered. He walked across the apartment as he spoke the same space that had once felt structured, now carrying a different weight. "This is because of the meeting," he said. "No," Deanna replied. "The meeting clarified it." Leo stopped moving. "So everything before that didn't matter?" he asked. Deanna considered the question. "It mattered," she said. "It just didn't change." Silence followed. Not unresolved, just complete. Leo spoke again, his voice quieter. "You could have told me," he said. Deanna did not respond immediately. "Then you would have heard it differently," she said. Leo closed his eyes briefly, not in frustration, but in recognition that the statement was not dismissive. It was accurate. The legal process moved forward without urgency. Filings were submitted, responses requested, timelines established. Evelyn Grant's communication remained consistent, precise, controlled, and entirely procedural. There were no escalations, no unnecessary delays, no attempts to leverage public exposure. The case existed within the system, and the system did not require emotion to function. Leo's attorney responded within the required window. Arguments were outlined, positions defined. The prenup was referenced repeatedly. It was, after all, the document Leo had relied on. The document he believed would protect him. In the weeks that followed, the implications of that document became clearer, not through argument, through interpretation. The prenup established separation, defined assets, clarified intention. It demonstrated that Leo had chosen to frame the relationship in terms of protection rather than partnership, that he had prioritized control over shared growth, that he had, in effect, drawn a line. The legal system did not judge that choice. It simply recognized it. At a procedural hearing, both parties appeared, not for confrontation, for confirmation. The courtroom was quiet, structured, and indifferent to personal narratives. The judge reviewed the documents, asked limited questions, and noted that both parties had entered the agreement voluntarily with full capacity. There was no drama, no raised voices, only acknowledgement. Leo stood a few feet away from Deanna, not looking at her directly, but aware of her presence. She did not look at him either, not out of avoidance, out of completion. After the hearing, they stepped into the hallway. The space was narrow, filled with quiet movement, other cases, other people, other decisions unfolding in parallel. Leo spoke first. "So that's it?" he asked. Deanna turned slightly toward him. "It's proceeding," she said. He nodded slowly. "I thought the prenup would protect me," he said. Deanna's expression did not change. "It did," she replied. Leo looked at her, confusion surfacing. "Then why does it feel like it didn't?" Deanna held his gaze. "Because it protected what you defined," she said, "not what you assumed." The distinction settled into the space between them. Not immediately understood, but no longer avoidable. In the months that followed, the outcomes became visible. Transit access did not secure the investment. Without the capital, its growth slowed, not abruptly, but steadily. Other opportunities emerged, but none carried the same scale or timing. Claire Donovan moved on. Her involvement had always been tied to momentum, and when momentum shifted, so did she. Margaret Carter did not speak about the situation publicly. Sophie Carter stopped asking questions. The structure that had once reinforced Leo's certainty no longer existed in the same form. Deanna did not expand her visibility. She did not announce anything. She did not correct public perception. Whitmore Capital continued its operations, investing where alignment existed, withdrawing where it did not. Her role remained consistent, quiet, precise, effective. One evening, months later, Deanna sat in a conference room that overlooked the city. The setting was similar to the one where Leo had once presented. But the dynamic was different. She reviewed a set of documents, her attention steady, her decisions measured. Across from her, a group of executives waited. Not impatiently, respectfully. She signed where necessary, closed the folder, and stood. No announcement followed. No explanation was required. Outside, the city moved as it always had, unaware, unchanged. Leo Carter remained part of that city, continuing, adjusting, learning perhaps in ways that did not require acknowledgement. And Deanna Kelly moved forward without looking back. Not because the past had no meaning, but because it had already fulfilled its purpose. What had begun as a contract meant to define limits had revealed something else entirely. Not through conflict, not through exposure, but through clarity. Clarity once established. The story does not end with a window. It settles into something quiet. Because not every outcome needs to be announced to be understood. Deanna never claimed and control that is demonstrated. Most people move too quickly to see that difference. They speak before they understand. They decide before they observe. But sometimes, the strongest position is the one that never needs to be defended. If you've stayed with this story until now, you already understand something deeper than what was said on the surface. Where are you watching from, and what time is it in right now? If this kind of story resonates with you, quiet strength, real consequences, and the kind of truth that unfolds without noise, you can follow along for more. There's always another story waiting. Sometimes it says more in silence than most do in words.